call up H.R. 6361, the District of Columbia National Guard Commanding General Residency Act. The clerk will report the bill, which was distributed in advance.
H.R. 6361, the District of Columbia National Guard Commanding General Residency Act.
Without objection, the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The clerk recognizes herself, the chair recognizes herself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed electronically to all members in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6361, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize the sponsor. I now recognize myself to speak in support of 6361. The National Guard is a unique part of the United States military. Unlike active duty and reserve members of the armed forces, members of the National Guard have a duty to serve their state as well as the United States at large. This unique relationship between the National Guard and the people demands additional connection to the population the National Guard serves. This bill would help advance this connection by requiring that the commanding general of the District of Columbia National Guard live among the people of the district. This is not a unique idea. Many federal, state, and local positions have requirements that office holders live in the jurisdictions in which they work. U.S. attorneys, U.S. marshals, U.S. district court judges, and more are all required to live where they work. H.R. 6361 simply follows this long-standing federal precedent by requiring the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard to live in the district. I want to thank Mrs. Norton for introducing this important bill. I urge all of my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back. Mr. Comer, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney. The D.C. National Guard was established in 1802 by President Thomas Jefferson. Today's D.C. National Guard includes 2,700 soldiers and airmen who reside within the District of Columbia and neighboring communities within the states of Virginia and Maryland. In other states and territories, National Guard units may be activated by the governor as well as the President of the United States. However, the D.C. National Guard has a unique command structure. The President of the United States appoints the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard, who reports solely to the President of the United States. The President has delegated the authority to activate the D.C. National Guard to the Secretary of Defense, who in turn has delegated the authority to the Secretary of the Army. So to be clear, the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard is a federal official appointed by the U.S. President. This position does not report to any local D.C. official. A residency requirement for the commanding general position simply does not make sense. This is especially true when those serving in the D.C. National Guard live across the local area in D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. Also, a residency requirement will not necessarily yield more qualified candidates or improve D.C. National Guard's readiness. Rather, it could greatly limit the pool of qualified candidates available to the President. Imposing a residency requirement is particularly burdensome in this case, considering the high cost of living in D.C. For this exact reason, many federal employees and officials with jobs in D.C. choose to commute from Maryland and Virginia. Because a D.C. residency requirement would greatly limit the pool of qualified applicants available to the President to appoint a future commanding general, I must oppose this bill. I urge my colleagues to oppose the bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the sponsor of the bill, Mrs. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, for marking up my bills today. This bill would require the commanding general of the District of Columbia National Guard to reside in the District of Columbia.
On this one?
DC has no control.
On this one, we're going to ask for a roll call.
DC has no control over the DC National Guard. Instead, the president controls the DC National Guard, which many Americans first learned either during the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol, when the Trump administration delayed deploying the National Guard for several hours, or during the June 2020 attack by federal law enforcement on largely peaceful protesters outside the White House, where the National Guard was used by the Trump administration as part of the attack. In contrast, governors of the states and the 3 territories that have National Guards control their National Guard. I have long introduced a bill, the DC National Guard Home Rule Act, which the chairwoman co-leads, that would give the DC mayor control over the DC National Guard. Last year, the House passed the DC National Guard Home Rule Act as part of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022. But the DC National Guard Home Rule Act was stripped out of the final version of the NDAA because Republicans threatened to vote against the must-pass NDAA if the NDAA included the DC National Guard. The commanding general of the DC National Guard is the top official of the DC Guard and is appointed by the president and is a federal employee. Residency requirements for government officials are found in federal law, DC law, and the laws of jurisdictions throughout the country. In fact, several states have laws that require the top officials in their National Guards to regard in their state, and it is highly likely that every state only appoints residents as the top official in their National Guard. The primary reason residency requirements exist is so that government officials have a connection to the residents they serve and in-depth knowledge of the unique issues and challenges faced by their residents. Congress has justifiably required that certain federal officials live in the jurisdiction of which they are appointed, including the U.S. District Court Judge, U.S. Marshals, and U.S. Attorneys. Similarly, Congress, which controls the local court system, has justifiably required local DC judges and members of the DC Judicial Nomination Commission and the DC Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure to live in the District of Columbia. There is no reason that the commanding general of the DC National Guard, a federal entity that serves only DC residents and that has both a military and law enforcement role, should not be required to live in the district. The commanding general needs to be part of the community the commanding general serves. A residency requirement for the commanding general of DC National Guard will lead to a better relationship with the National Guard and DC residents, and is a matter of fairness to DC residents. I urge my colleagues to support this bill.
The gentlelady yields back. Who else seeks recognition? The question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. A recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is ordered, and a recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11, Committee Rule 5B, proceedings on the bill are postponed. Okay? Okay, pursuant now to notice, I now call up H.R. 6497, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2022. The clerk will report the bill, which was distributed in advance.
H.R. 6497, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2022.
Without objection, the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The Chair recognizes herself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed electronically to all members in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6497, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself. Last month, as over 100,000 Russian troops amassed along the border with Ukraine, 70 government websites in Ukraine were hacked and taken offline. Several weeks later, the Department of Homeland Security issued a bulletin that stated, and I quote, "We assess that Russia would consider initiating a cyber attack against the homeland if it is perceived a U.S. or NATO response to a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine threatened its long-term national security," end quote. This warning is a stark reminder of other recent cyber assaults committed by geopolitical adversaries against U.S. governments, businesses, and civil society, including the SolarWinds attack by Russian actors and the Microsoft Exchange server attack by Chinese hackers. A 2018 estimate put the cumulative cost to the United States of cyber espionage at $600 billion. And that is in addition to the cost of cyber espionage from Russia and other adversaries. It is crucial that we shore up the cyber defenses of the federal government. But to truly guard against the cyber attacks of tomorrow, we must also recognize that the next sophisticated cyber attack won't look like the last one. To defend our federal networks in this new frontier of cyber warfare, we must pursue a transformative approach, and we must be constantly vigilant in our threat protection, detection, response, and resilience. And that's exactly what we are here to accomplish today with the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2022. This bill modernizes a law commonly known as FISMA, which was enacted in 2002 to establish a cybersecurity framework for the federal government. As the barrage of major cyber attacks of the last few years makes clear, the threat landscape has transformed dramatically since the law was last updated in 2014. FISMA 2022, which I introduced last week with our ranking member, Mr. Comer, modernizes our approach to cybersecurity. This legislation ensures we shift to a risk-based approach and make the crucial shift to a zero-trust architecture that continuously monitors the security of federal networks. The bill contains many important similarities to its companion legislation in the Senate, which was introduced by our counterparts, Chairman Gary Peters and Ranking Member Rob Portman. It also reflects valuable insights gained in the bipartisan hearing we held last month on the need for FISMA reform, as well as key takeaways from this committee's investigations into recent devastating cyber attacks, including the SolarWinds breach. When that breach was discovered, several federal agencies didn't even know whether their own networks had been compromised due to inadequate logging of network activity. The Office of Management and Budget faced major challenges in assessing the extent of the damage, and various agencies made inconsistent assessments of whether the breach even counted as a major incident. Our bill, which we're calling FISMA 2022, addresses these issues by requiring detailed and updated requirements for logging events on agency systems and retaining relevant data. It also requires OMB to update the definition of major incident every 2 years to ensure effectiveness. The bill also requires agencies to have detailed inventories of their systems and software, including software components. With these inventories, we'll be able to identify and mitigate vulnerabilities faster to better protect the federal government's mission and assets. In a crisis like the discovery of the Log4j software vulnerability, inventories like this will be game changers. The SolarWinds investigation also highlighted how critical it is to have clear incident reporting requirements with well-defined roles and responsibilities. This brings new clarity to these areas, which will save valuable response time during an attack. The bill also takes steps to increase supply chain security and transparency by requiring federal contractors to immediately report an incident impacting federal data or information systems. In addition to looking at SolarWinds, the committee has also investigated the devastating ransomware attacks that rocked Colonial Pipeline, CNA Financial, and JBS Foods. That investigation highlighted the importance of having a complete picture of ransomware attacks, which is why FISMA 2022 lays out detailed reporting requirements for agencies and contractors that fall victim to ransomware attack. In order to respond effectively, the federal government needs to be notified as soon as possible when a ransom is paid. The urgency of these safeguards builds by the day. According to a report published last week by the Identity Theft Resource Center, data breaches were up 68% in 2021 compared with the previous year, and for the first time, ransomware attacks took the lead as the foremost cause of data compromises. That report also found that record numbers of consumer breach notifications lacked key transparency features, which can make it harder for impacted individuals to take action. To ensure Americans can expect better from their federal government, FISMA 2022 requires agencies and affected individuals within 45 days if their personal information is compromised. I would like to extend my deep gratitude to Ranking Member Comer for his strong partnership through every step of drafting and advancing this critical national security piece of legislation. I am also grateful to all of our members who worked diligently on this issue in last month's hearing and helped to make this bill as strong as possible. The urgency of today's cyber threats demands nothing less. And with that, I recognize Mr. Comer, Ranking Member of this and author of this legislation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are here today to update the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, or FISMA, the primary law governing federal cybersecurity. I want to thank Chairwoman Maloney and her staff for their hard work, professionalism, and collaboration on this effort. It's been nearly 8 years since Congress last addressed the structure, framework, and evolution of our federal cybersecurity in a comprehensive manner. And in that time, we have seen criminal organizations, nation states, and all manner of enemies unleash a nonstop barrage of cyber attacks against American companies and federal agencies. These threats are becoming more sophisticated, and the damage they can inflict puts our national security, economy, even the personal safety of American people at risk. As these threats evolve, FISMA must evolve too in order to meet the challenge. While not the only high-profile attack in recent years, the SolarWinds breach last year served as a wake-up call. The governance structure of federal cybersecurity, the maturity of our cyber defenses, and the effectiveness of our oversight tools were no longer up to the task. Those are the main problems our bill addresses. We clarify roles, responsibilities, and reporting channels. OMB sets policy. CISA gives operational assistance, and the National Cyber Director is in charge of overall cyber strategy. We make the National Cyber Director the point person for briefing Congress, They will coordinate the multiple agencies involved in a major cyber incident to give Congress a clear picture of the situation. They will also serve to help industry navigate the array of federal agencies who come calling after an attack. We also codify a Federal Information Security Officer to ensure focus on cybersecurity within OMB and to ensure proper coordination with the National Cyber Director. Second, we make it clear Congress wants federal agencies to adopt modern cyber practices. SolarWinds showed the days of perimeter defenses are over. Given the sophistication of our foes, we have no choice but to move to a zero-trust framework where agencies assume anyone inside their networks is up to no good. Finally, we give clear direction that Congress expects new processes and metrics to understand the readiness of our cyber defenses or on a continual basis. Point in time, backwards-looking assessments will no longer cut it. I appreciate the input from all stakeholders as we have worked on this bill. I'm also pleased to see such bipartisan support from this committee with so many original co-sponsors. I'm confident our risk-based, real-time approach will help federal agencies and private sector partners address a quickly evolving threat landscape and more effectively respond to the inevitable breaches to come. This is a good example of what this committee can do when we focus on the real needs of the American people and go through regular order. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? Mr. Conley is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for bringing this bill to the full committee for markup. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor. Cybersecurity of our crucial federal IT systems is critical. Over the past several years, we've witnessed the consequences of vulnerable cybersecurity infrastructure across the federal government IT landscape. For example, 7 years ago, OPM suffered a massive data breach that completely disrupted the operations of the Office of Personnel Management and affected more than 20 million federal employees. Since then, cyber incidents have continued to grow in both frequency and sophistication. In fiscal year 2020 alone, more than 30,000 cybersecurity incidents plagued the federal government. Unsurprisingly, GAO continues to list this issue, federal cybersecurity, as a high-risk item on its high-risk list and has done so since 1997. A fundamental component of the security is FISMA, which was first signed into law in December 2002 and last updated in 2014. Despite FISMA's positive contributions in improving the federal posture with respect to cybersecurity, Congress has a critical role in ensuring it evolves to accommodate and anticipate new realities. When FISMA first passed, many of today's key cyber stakeholders did not exist, like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency and the National Cyber Director. FISMA 2022 incorporates these new stakeholders, affirming and clarifying their roles. In addition, government officials have cited FISMA requirements as onerous and overly focused on compliance rather than on mitigating the actual potential threat. FISMA 22 streamlines reporting requirements and tries to get us focused on the actual threat and deterring it. Finally, as technology evolves, so must our approach to securing our nation's infrastructure. FISMA 2022 incorporates modern IT principles by promoting key tenets of President Biden's executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, including zero trust architecture and vulnerability disclosure programs. Shared services have particularly significant potential to promote efficiency, cost savings, and best practices. Similar security and acquisition principles are advanced by the government-wide Federal Risk Authorization Management Program, which provides a standardized approach to cybersecurity assessment authorization and continuous monitoring for federal cloud products and services. For the past 5 years, I've worked to improve and codify FedRAMP through my FedRAMP Authorization Act, HR 21, which has passed the House 4 times and is supported as an original co-sponsor by the ranking member, Mr. Comer. I might add, the Senate has yet to pass it on the floor of the Senate. And yet, that bill is being held up in the Senate and not passed, even though we had broad bipartisan support here in the House for that bill. So I hope that as we move forward on this critical piece of legislation, that our committee will protect its interests in a bill that it's passed 4 times over the last 5 years, that I think is a critical piece of cybersecurity in certifying private sector partners who want to provide cloud services to the federal government. So with that, Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the markup. And I look forward to cooperating with you and the ranking member in seeing this bill through to final passage and in ensuring that the House version of the FedRAMP authorization bill becomes law. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you and the ranking member as well as committee staff on both sides for the hard work and dedication to updating the Federal Information Security Modernization Act. I'm hopeful that the committee's work to modernize cybersecurity and its framework for federal agencies will certainly allow us to keep pace with the threats that they face every minute of every day. I'm also hopeful that our efforts to reduce bureaucracy and confusion will result in better responses to the cyber incidents that we all know are coming. As a ranking member of the GovOps subcommittee, I have particular interest in ensuring that the metrics we use to assess cyber security gives us a clear picture of what's really going on. This is a key component in updating FITARA, which of course is a related effort that I'm eager to move forward with my colleague, Chairman Conley, and I appreciate his efforts in that regard as well. Both FISMA reform and FITARA reform, when coupled together with other measures such as the FedRAMP authorization bill and IT modernization centers of excellence, I believe represent a solid solid work product on really substantive issues. And I'm glad to have been part of the leadership and playing a role in all those with some of my other colleagues. Frankly, again, as has already been shared this morning, all of this shows what committee can do when we do our job and focus on issues that matter to the American people. And so with that, Madam Chair, I likewise support this measure and I look forward to the coming work in this regard, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you for your statement. Who else seeks recognition on this important bill? Seeing no other people seeking recognition, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on the favorability reporting of H.R. 6497 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. Without objection, staff is now authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the matters considered by the committee in this markup. H.R. 6497 shall be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 6419, the Fair Chance Improvement Act. The clerk will report the bill, which was distributed in advance.
H.R. 6419, the Fair Chance Improvement Act.
Without objection, the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The chair recognizes herself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed electronically to all members in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 6419, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize the sponsor of the bill, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, and I am honored to sponsor the Fair Chance Improvement Act, a bipartisan bill alongside Congresswoman Mace. And I am grateful for the committee and its staff for helping shepherd it through today's meeting for markup. In September of 2019, Congress passed the late Chairman Elijah Cummings' Fair Chance Act with bipartisan support. The Fair Chance Act prohibits federal agencies and federal contractors from requesting that job applicants provide information on their arrest and conviction histories until a conditional job offer is extended. Through this law, we finally pulled the federal government into alignment with dozens of states and localities across the country, including New York City. These jurisdictions led the way in showing that criminal history boxes on job applications were incongruent with providing every applicant a fair chance to compete for government jobs, especially in the broader context of a criminal system that systematically over-targets poor people and people of color. The Fair Chance Improvement Act, which we are considering today, represents a final and necessary step in putting this crucial and widely supported law into full effect. Under the Fair Chance Act as enacted in 2019, enforcement authority, which includes the power to establish and make public procedures to submit complaints and investigate contractor compliance through compliance evaluations, lies between the GSA and the Department of Defense. Based on direct feedback from both the DoD and the Department of Labor, this bill transfers enforcement authority for the Fair Chance Act to the Secretary of Labor. The reasons why both agencies support this simple and reasonable fix are clear. The DOL, particularly the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, is already responsible for federal contractors' compliance with federal employment law. That means that the DOL, unlike the DoD, has existing procedures and infrastructure necessary to perform oversight of federal contractors and investigate complaints of violations. The Fair Chance Act was a significant milestone in making federal jobs equally accessible to our constituents with arrest and criminal histories. The Fair Chance Improvement Act represents the simple yet critical finishing touches that the Fair Chance Act requires in order to be successfully implemented. I again thank the chairwoman and our Republican co-sponsors for the opportunity to speak. I again thank the chairwoman for the opportunity to speak in support of the bill and our Republican co-sponsors for their cooperation, and look forward to shepherding it through to enactment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and the gentlelady yields back. The gentlewoman from South Carolina, Ms. Mace, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Maloney. Congress passed the Fair Chance Act in 2019 with widespread bipartisan and conservative support. The Fair Chance Act is a simple concept. It ensures that federal government contractors wait until a conditional offer has been made to ask about an applicant's criminal history. This gives applicants who may have a criminal past a fair chance to prove they are qualified for a job.
We're
This-
really sick of these.
This went into effect in December 2021, 2 years after the date of enactment. Under current law, complaints for violations of the Fair Chance Act may be brought by a job applicant or anyone else who feels the law was violated. The relevant federal agency is then required to investigate and may even suspend payment on the contractors for full compliance in the event of a second violation. Under the Fair Chance Improvement Act, which I've co-sponsored with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and I want to thank her today for the opportunity to work with her on this piece of legislation, all complaint intake, investigation, and penalties would be consolidated with the Department of Labor. The overarching premise of this bill is that compliance with the Fair Chance Act should not be randomly spread across various government agencies and their unique processes. Instead, enforcement should be consolidated in one federal agency with the experience to handle these kinds of employment rights issues. This is about consolidating federal agencies, streamlining, and providing consistency on these employment rights and labor issues. This will provide a one-stop shop for federal contractor compliance operations as well as those who need to file a complaint. This will strengthen the Fair Chance Act and help alleviate industry contractor compliance burdens. I want to thank the bill's sponsor, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, and Chairwoman Maloney for working with us and our staff on producing an amendment on the nature of a substitute here that we can all stand behind. And I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this legislation, and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chair Maloney. Let me offer a little bit different view on this. Our company, I've been in the private sector for over 40 years, 45 years probably to be exact. I really don't understand how this bill could streamline hiring. The time that you need information is on the front end when you're considering hiring somebody. It's not rich, it's not poor, it's not black, it's not white, it's just getting information. And it's if you're an employer, you need this from a liability standpoint. And I don't understand how you have a conditional job offer. You either hire somebody or you don't. But this could, if anything needs to be brought up at the front, is something like any violations, any convictions, so that you have the total picture. And I would argue this bill does just the opposite of what it's intended to do. And again, I don't know how many here have actually had to hire and run a company, but you need all the information you can get. And to eliminate this, it's really hurting the applicant, because to be considered, whatever that means, a conditional offer, to receive a conditional offer, and then to later in the process to say, no, you're not, we've got a problem with whatever the conviction is, it's not fair to the applicant, and it's not fair to the company who is putting out a lot of money to interview the different candidates for a job. And this is just one of many that you need to know on the front end. So I oppose this. I don't think it makes sense, and I think it hurts both parties. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition?
Madam Chair.
Does anyone seek recognition? The chair recognizes herself then. I strongly support H.R. 64919, the Fair Chance Improvement Act. And I want to thank our colleagues, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez and Ms. Mace, for introducing this important bipartisan legislation. In 2019, Congress passed the Fair Chance to Compete for Jobs, also known as the Fair Chance Act, as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. That bill, championed by former Chairman Cummings with broad bipartisan support, prohibits candidates for federal employment from being asked about their criminal history before a conditional offer is made. The bill we are considering today would transfer the enforcement responsibility to ensure that federal contractors are complying with the law from the General Services Administration and Department of Defense to the Department of Labor. Specifically, the Secretary of Labor would be required to establish and publish procedures for receiving complaints about violations of the law and would be authorized to investigate such complaints. The Department of Labor, and particularly the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, are a familiar point of contact for federal contractors. That office is far better equipped than GSA and DOD to carry out enforcement of the Fair Chance Act. In the amendment in the nature of a substitute I have offered, the Department of Labor would have to complete implementation and apply its procedures to contracts awarded after 16 months of enactment. I want to commend Congresswomen Ocasio-Cortez and Ms. Mace for introducing this sensible bill. I thank them for their leadership and support, and I am an original co-sponsor. I am pleased to acknowledge the strong bipartisan support that continues to push this historic reform forward. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this bill, and I yield my remaining time to my colleague Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Maloney. And you had made clear in your remarks, this is frankly a common sense bill that we update and streamline existing legislation, particularly the Fair Chance Act that was passed overwhelmingly and in a bipartisan fashion in 2019. It's extremely important how this actually shows up in people's lives is that all too often when a person applies for a job and they have a prior conviction from years ago, regardless of how small the nature of that conviction may be, when the box was there early on in a candidate's application process, it was an easy target for simply removing the candidate very, very early on in a process, which hinders a person's economic opportunity and really perpetuates some of our discrimination and institutional discrimination. With that being remedied with the FISMA Act in 2019, this bill is merely, frankly, an administrative and optional enhancement to make sure that in compliance with the law, and that making sure that compliance and enforcement to ensure that the law is being adhered to is really streamlined and brought under the Department of Labor instead of being split among multiple agencies that don't necessarily have the infrastructure for over. So I thank my colleague, Congresswoman Mace, for helping lead on this as well, and I urge all of our colleagues to support the bill.
The lady yields back. Who else seeks recognition?
Madam Chair, it's Mr. Mfume on Maryland.
Congressman Mfume, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief, Madam Chair. I want to sincerely thank you, and in particular to thank the gentlewoman from New York and the gentlewoman from South Carolina for fashioning a bipartisan approach to something that had always been previously looked at as a bipartisan issue. This is significant, and I appreciate the references back to my former colleague, Representative Cummings. This is the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. It makes good sense, and I would urge its immediate adoption. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? The question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no.
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 In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to.
Madam Chairman, I
Yes.
request a roll call.
The gentleman has requested a recorded vote, and a recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is so ordered, and pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11 and Committee Rule 5B, proceedings on the bill are postponed. Okay.
Madam Chairman, I'd request a roll call on the final passage.
Okay. Well, we're postponing that.
I withdraw my request for
Okay.
roll call.
Pardon me? By unanimous consent, so ordered. Okay. The question now occurs on favorability reporting of H.R. 6419 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no.
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 May I request roll call?
Okay. The ayes have it on the bill. A recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is ordered. And a recorded vote is ordered pursuant to Clause 2 of Rule 11 and Committee Rule 5B. Proceedings on the bill are postponed for the recorded vote. Okay? All right. Now, pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 5962, the Supply Chain Security Training Act. The clerk will report the bill, which was distributed in advance.
H.R. 5962, the Supply Chain Security Training Act.
Without objection, the bill is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The chair recognizes herself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed electronically to all members in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5962, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as a base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize myself. This bill, the Supply Chain Security Training Act, continues today's important work of defending our nation's information and communications technology supply chains. Congressman Joe Neguse and our committee member, Representative Scott Franklin, led this legislation in the House, which mirrors S-2201, a bill introduced by my Senate counterpart, Chairman Gary Peters of the Committee of Homeland Security and Government Reform, and Senator Ron Johnson. At the time the SolarWinds breach was discovered in December of 2020, a Government Accountability Office report revealed that no federal agencies surveyed had fully implemented supply chain risk management standards for information and communications technology. As we discussed earlier, FISMA 2022 takes crucial steps to shore up the supply chains impacting federal information systems and data by creating new software inventories and requiring federal contractors to report relevant incidents and vulnerabilities, including supply chain compromises. To maximize these efforts, the Supply Chain Security Training Act would establish a training program for federal agency employees with responsibilities related to supply chain risk management, which will prepare them to identify and mitigate supply chain threats that arise in the acquisition of products and services. The amendment, in the nature of a substitute, incorporates recommendations from the National Institute of Standards and Technology to improve the training program, ensuring that its contents are kept up to date as threats evolve. Our complex global supply chains span continents and are continuously targeted by bad actors looking for a backdoor into federal systems. To properly guard against these attacks, we must systematically equip our federal acquisition officials with the knowledge and tools they need to maximize their unique positions in our cybersecurity defenses. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Franklin, is now recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm proud to lead or co-lead this important legislation with my colleague, Congressman Neguse. We've seen many examples of cyber attacks on the U.S. government that have revealed weaknesses in our IT systems. One of those weaknesses exists in the software products purchased by our federal agencies. These agencies' operations rely on global supply chains for goods and services, but this makes them increasingly vulnerable to threats from malicious criminal actors, foreign nations, and other adversaries. In the aftermath of such cyber attacks, these major cyber attacks we've seen, such as the one that targeted SolarWinds, the committee must pursue avenues to exercise robust oversight of agency supply chain security. HR 5962 aims to ensure the federal workforce understands supply chain risks and associated policies. The bill tasks the General Services Administration with developing a training program which will then be issued government-wide by the Office of Management and Budget. It will prepare federal personnel to identify and mitigate security risks throughout the acquisition lifecycle of products and services, including information and communications technology. This program should help our federal agencies avoid purchasing software products vulnerable to malware. The bill also requires GSA to coordinate with the existing Federal Acquisition Security Council, an interagency council established by the 2018 Secure Technology Act, to develop policies and procedures addressing federal supply chain security risks. Relatedly, HR 6497, the FISMA Modernization Act of 2022, which we also addressed previously in the committee today, recognizes the central role the Federal Acquisition Security Council and supply chain issues have in federal cybersecurity by extending the council's authorization through 2031. I'm a proud co-sponsor of Chairman Maloney and Ranking Member Comer's FISMA reform bill. Despite existing work to address federal supply chain risk management, there's currently no federal workforce training requirement to ensure these policies are properly and consistently implemented. The national security stakes are too high to leave such a strategic gap in our federal defenses, and HR 5962 addresses the security gap with education and training. I appreciate Congressman Neguse's leadership on this issue, and I look forward to seeing the Supply Chain Security Training Act advance through Congress. I encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this important bill, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? The question now occurs on the amendment in the nature
Madam
of...
Chair, my hand is raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Heiss, I didn't see it. Mr. Heiss is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate the efforts of Mr. Neguse and Franklin for putting this forward. There's no question the importance of training in relation to our supply chain security is critical. And I'm going to support this. It is an important piece of legislation. But I do want to point out here that we continue to nibble around the edges. We are not really addressing the problem, which is China. And there's the problem. China is attacking our IT systems every day. They want nothing more than to damage our country in any way that they can. And it seems to me that we basically just continue to sit here and let it happen. We continue to sit here and just watch. We at some point have to wake up and stop pretending that China is anything other than an outright enemy of the United States of America. It's time that there be serious consequences. I just believe that until we address the real problem, which is China, and until we have serious consequences to China for their nefarious activities against the United States, they are going to continue it. Yes, we need to train our people to recognize it, but at some point we have got to deal with the real problem, which is China. We are far, far, far too vulnerable in too many ways as they continue attacking our country, hacking our networks, stealing our intellectual property, which has been going on for decades, doing all the things that they do to harm us. And I just believe at some point we need measures that have teeth in them against the activities of China against the United States of America. That is what the American people need. That's what our country expects. And I believe that's what this committee needs to be leading the way on. And so with that, I appreciate the efforts of my colleagues. I will support this, but it's my hope that we open our eyes to the real problem and move forward to addressing China in the future. And that I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? Does anyone else seek recognition? Seeing no one else seeking recognition, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on favorably reporting H.R. 5962 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the question of the chair, in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. H.R. 5962 shall be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the matters considered by the committee in this markup. Pursuant to notice, I now call up the committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022. The clerk will report the committee print, which was distributed in advance.
Committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022.
Without objection, the committee print is considered read and open to amendment at any point. The chair recognizes herself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute, copies of which have been distributed electronically to all members in advance. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022, offered by Mrs. Maloney of New York.
Without objection, the amendment is considered read and will serve as base text for purposes of amendment. I now recognize the sponsor of the bill, Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, for recognizing me, and thank you for bringing up the GAO Mandates Revision Act. One of the Government Accountability Office's legislative mandates is to audit financial statements of newly established entities. The Comptroller General is currently responsible for auditing the following entities: the Federal Housing Finance Agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Congressional Award Foundation, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, the Federal Civil Penalty Inflation Adjustment, the Highway Trust Fund, the Export-Import Loan and Guarantee Transactions, Capital Preservation Fund, and the Senate Preservation Fund. Now that these entities have been in existence for multiple years, the financial management challenges and risks are lower. For instance, GAO has performed the Federal Housing Finance Agency's financial statement audit for 12 years, and there were no material findings. I am committed to making the government work better for the American people. The GAO Mandates Revisions Act would revise the GAO's legislative mandates by shifting the responsibility for financial statement audits from GAO to other auditing entities. By doing this, we are eliminating duplicative and redundant work and allowing GAO to operate more efficiently and provide greater value to the Congress and other areas of work. I would like to thank Rep. Keller of Pennsylvania, who has graciously joined me as an original co-sponsor of this piece of legislation. The bipartisan legislation takes a common sense approach that ensures the GAO can better serve Congress and the American people. I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Keller, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, and also I would like to especially thank Congresswoman Brown for her work on this legislation. The Government Accountability Office serves a vital role in examining agency spending and advising lawmakers and agencies how to make the government more efficient. The GAO conducts regular mandated audits and specific congressional requests to review government programs to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. In fiscal year 2021 alone, the GAO saved taxpayers an estimated of $66 billion and reports an estimated federal taxpayer savings of $158 for every dollar Congress has invested in the GAO over the past 5 years. These numbers reflect the value GAO provides to the American taxpayer. However, their resources can be strained from time to time by duplicative or outdated statutory mandates. Such outdated mandates force GAO to spend limited resources on reporting activities instead of more timely and meaningful audits and investigations. This legislation is a good housekeeping measure that removes unnecessary requirements and makes GAO more efficient with taxpayer dollars. The GAO Mandates Revision Act modifies or repeals certain statutory mandates that have become outdated. Revising or repealing outdated mandates will help the GAO free up valuable resources to track the unprecedented federal spending that occurred in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is also vital that GAO review the rampant waste and fraud in programs like unemployment insurance, Medicaid, and other high-risk programs. It's really an honor to be an original co-sponsor of this legislation, and I strongly encourage my colleagues to support this bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? Mr. Conley. Mr. Conley is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I just want to take a moment to congratulate Representative Brown, who's a proud member, our newest member of our subcommittee, and Mr. Keller for their bipartisan effort in a very common sense piece of legislation. You know, it's not often Congress gets around to kind of cleaning up the detritus. We're good at passing laws that require all kinds of reporting requirements. We're not always as good at looking back saying, well, all right, that mission's been accomplished, or those reports are duplicative or whatever. And this is one of those times where we're actually being asked to do just that. GAO is such an important agency for Congress. Every year our committee has, I think, one of the most consequential hearings in the Congress, which is the high-risk list GAO produces and that we need to respond to. And we do legislatively. Clearing up sort of the brush and the bramble allows us to focus on those priorities. So I thank our colleague, Chantel Brown and Mr. Keller for bringing this piece of legislation to us. It will make our work more focused and it will allow GAO to focus on the priorities we in Congress want to set. So thank you so much for your leadership and thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for bringing this bill to us in markup today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Seeing no one else seeking recognition, I recognize myself. I strongly support the GAO Mandates Revision Act, and I want to thank my colleagues, Congresswoman Brown and Congressman Keller, for their bipartisan effort in introducing it. This is a simple, common-sense bill that would eliminate or modify certain GAO reports currently mandated by statute. This will allow GAO to use its resources more efficiently and assist Congress more effectively by eliminating costly reports. In many instances, GAO's specialized oversight capacity is no longer needed, and by eliminating certain mandatory reports, the bill would enable those resources to be redirected to higher priorities. The GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022 would eliminate or shift to inspectors general the responsibility for performing 10 financial statement audits or reviews currently mandated by statute. In many instances, Congress required GAO to audit the financial statements of newly established entities. Now that those entities have been in existence for multiple years, the financial management challenges and risks are lower. As we seek greater transparency and accountability within our federal government, I appreciate the bipartisan approach taken in this bill. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back. Does anyone else seek recognition? Seeing none, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on favorable reporting the committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022 as amended. All those opposed, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to. The committee print of the GAO Mandates Revision Act of 2022 shall be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the matters considered by the committee in this markup. There being no further discussion or amendments, we now turn to recorded votes that have been postponed. In order to coordinate with other committees and give sufficient notice to members, we will recess and take those votes in approximately 5 minutes. The committee now stands in recess. Wow. committee is now in order. It is now in order to take postponed votes. Members are reminded to be ready to unmute themselves when they are called on to vote. Members are further reminded that pursuant to House rules, their video must be on in order for them to vote. The question now occurs on reporting H.R. 6361 favorably as amended. All those in favor say aye, or let's call the roll now. All those in support say aye.
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 Opposed say no.
No. No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the bill is agreed to.
Madam Chair, can we get a recorded vote on
A
6361?
recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Norton?
Ms. Norton votes aye.
Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Lynch votes aye.
Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Connolly? I'm sorry, Mr.
Aye.
Cooper? Mr. Cooper?
We're starting to vote now. Okay.
Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy?
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Khanna? Mr. Mfume?
Mr. Mfume votes aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?
Aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Tlaib? Ms. Porter?
Aye.
Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush?
Aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Ms. Brown?
Aye. Brown votes aye.
Ms. Brown votes aye. Mr. Davis? Ms. Wasserman Schultz? Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Johnson? Mr. Sarbanes? Ms. Spear?
Aye.
Ms. Spear votes aye. Ms. Kelly?
Kelly votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Ms. Lawrence?
Aye.
Ms. Lawrence votes aye. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. Gomez?
Gomez, aye.
Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Presley? Ms. Presley?
Presley votes aye.
Ms. Presley votes aye. Mr. Comer?
Comer votes no.
Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Jordan? Ms. Fox?
Fox votes no.
Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Heiss?
No.
Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman?
No.
Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud? Mr. Gibbs?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gibbs. Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gibbs?
No. Gibbs, no.
Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins?
No.
Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Sessions?
Sessions, no.
Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Keller?
No.
Mr. Keller votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. Clyde?
No.
Mr. Clyde votes no. Ms. Mace? Mr. Franklin?
No.
Mr. Franklin votes no. Mr. LaTurner?
No.
Mr. LaTurner votes no. Mr. Fallon?
No.
Mr. Fallon votes no.
No. Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Harrell?
Ms. Harrell votes no.
Ms. Harrell votes no. Mr. Donalds?
No.
Mr. Donalds votes no. Madam Chair?
Maloney votes aye.
Madam Chair,
No,
this is
votes aye.
Wasserman Schultz. How am I recorded?
Ms. Wasserman Schultz, you are not recorded.
Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
Madam Chairman,
Hank
Madam Chair-
Johnson, how am I recorded?
Mr. Johnson, you are not recorded.
Vote aye.
Mr. Johnson votes aye.
Madam Chair, Congresswoman Mace, how am I recorded?
Ms. Mace, you are not recorded.
Ms. Mace is a no.
Ms. Mace votes no.
Is there any member who has not voted? Is there any member wishing to change his or her vote?
We recorded him already.
Mr. Gomez, how are you recorded? Okay. The clerk will
Is this the
report the
fir-
tally when ready.
Madam Chair, is this the first vote?
Yes, it is. We have one more vote.
Madam
I'm,
Chair,
Gomez-
this is Cooper. May I vote?
Mr.
Yes,
Gomez
you
is
Cooper,
aye.
can. Mr. Cooper, you're recognized for your vote.
Thank you. I'm assuming I'm voting aye, but you can correct me, Madam Chair.
You're correct.
Mr. Cooper votes aye.
Mr. Cooper votes aye, and the clerk will report the tally when ready.
How am I recorded, Chairwoman? I'm so sorry. It's Talib.
You are not recorded.
I would like to vote yes, please.
Ms. Talib votes aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the clerk will report the tally when ready.
On that vote, the ayes are 21 and the nays are 17.
HR 6361 shall be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the matters considered by the committee in this markup. The question now occurs on favorably reporting HR 6419 as amended. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no.
No. No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it and the bill is agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. A recorded vote is ordered. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Norton?
Ms. Norton votes aye.
Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Lynch votes aye.
Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Cooper?
Cooper votes aye.
Mr. Cooper votes aye. Mr. Connolly?
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy?
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Raskin?
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Khanna? Mr. Mfume?
Mr. Mfume votes aye.
Mr. Mfume, could you turn your camera on?
Mr. Mfume votes aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez?
Aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Talib?
Talib votes aye.
Ms. Talib votes aye. Ms. Porter?
Aye.
Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush?
Bush votes aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Ms. Brown?
Brown votes aye.
Ms. Brown votes aye. Mr. Davis? Ms. Wasserman Schultz?
Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye. Mr. Welch?
Aye.
Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Johnson?
Johnson votes aye.
Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Sarbanes? Ms. Spear?
Spear votes aye.
Ms. Spear votes aye. Ms. Kelly?
Kelly votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Ms. Lawrence?
Lawrence votes aye.
Ms. Lawrence votes aye. Mr. DeSaulnier? Mr. Gomez? Mr. Gomez? Ms. Presley?
See about Jeff Zucker?
Presley votes aye.
Wow.
Ms. Presley votes aye. Mr. Comer?
Comer votes yes.
Mr. Comer votes aye. Mr. Jordan? Ms. Fox?
Fox votes no.
Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Heiss?
No.
Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud?
Could you repeat the bill number?
HR
I did not-
6419.
Cloud votes aye.
Mr. Cloud votes aye. Mr. Gibbs?
No.
Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins?
No.
Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Sessions?
Sessions, no.
Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Keller?
No.
Mr. Keller votes no. Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. Clyde?
No.
Mr. Clyde votes no. Ms. Mace?
Mace, aye.
Ms. Mace votes aye. Mr. Franklin?
No.
Mr. Franklin votes no. Mr. LaTurner?
Aye.
Mr. LaTurner votes aye. Mr. Fallon? Ms. Harrell?
No, sorry, this is Fallon, no.
Mr. Fallon votes no. Ms. Harrell?
Ms. Harrell votes no.
Ms. Harrell votes no. Mr. Donalds?
Yes.
Mr. Donalds votes yes. Madam Chair?
The gentleman, Maloney votes aye. And the
Maloney
gentleman
votes aye.
seeks recognition.
How is Gomez recorded?
I was recorded as a no, but I really want to be an aye in my heart.
Mr. Grothman, off no on aye. Mr. Gomez, you are not recorded.
Gomez, aye.
Mr. Gomez votes aye.
Is there any member who has not voted? Is there any member wishing to change his or her vote? The clerk will report the tally when ready.
On that vote, the ayes are 27 and the nays are 11.
H.R. 6419 shall be favorably reported to the House. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes to the matters considered by the committee in this markup. And before we adjourn, we have one final piece of business which I will dispose of very quickly. Pursuant to notice, I call up the following postal naming bills, which were distributed in advance. H.R. 203, 224, 2142, 5794, 5949, 5951, 5952, 6040, 6080, and 6386. Without objection, the bills are considered read, and I request unanimous consent for their immediate consideration and en bloc. Without objection, the bills are passed. There being no further business, I want to thank you all for your participation today. The committee stands adjourned.